Sudan's army chief, Abdel Fattah-Burhan, has formed a new transitional council headed by himself to lead the country following the military coup last month. The new 14-member sovereign council, for which one member is yet to be named, includes civilians representing Sudan's regions, but none of them from the Forces of Freedom and Change political coalition that had been sharing power with the military since 2019.
Sudan's main civilian political coalition has rejected any talks with the military in its first press conference since last month's coup. Al-Burhan is spokesperson for the Forces of Freedom and Change, which signed a power-sharing agreement with the military in 2019. He said on Wednesday that the coalition supports Prime Minister Abdel Fattah, currently under house arrest, in calling for a return to pre-coup conditions.
We stress that we will not meet with the military. Our position is unequivocally clear. There will be no negotiations and no compromise with the undertakers of the coup. And we commend the firm position of the Prime Minister Abdel Fattah.
A top military official has said the coup, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, was to preserve security and stability and correct the course of the People's Revolution, which overthrew longtime leader Omar al-Bashir. Burhan has said he is committed to a democratic transition and elections in July 2023. But he's under international pressure to reverse his actions, and the UN Security Council is meeting over the situation. Several civilian politicians and officials were arrested following the coup. El-Burhan said the coalition rejects and condemns the pressures being placed on those who have been detained, and that their lives are being endangered. The FFC also said it supports calls by resistance committees for marches of millions on November the 13th and 17th, under the slogan, "No negotiations, no partnerships, no legitimacy." Despite struggling under an internet blackout, those committees brought out hundreds of thousands in anti-military protests on October the 30th. And have threatened a campaign of general strikes and civil disobedience.
For more on the latest developments in Sudan, we're now joined via Zoom by Dr. Jok Madut Jok, who's a professor of citizenship and public affairs at Syracuse University in New York State in America. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you. What do we make of this transitional council that's led by the military leader that led the coup? It's starting to sound like Mali and Guinea.
Thank you, sir, for having me. Good to be back again. Yes, indeed, you are right. I think it is reminiscent of many decades of Africa's penchant to stage and accept military coups as a way to change government. And this does not bode well for the 21st century, especially in a country like Sudan, where citizens have time and time again overthrown military generals and dictatorships with a desire to set up a democratic system, only to be disappointed over and over again. This particular act by General Burhan of Sudan is definitely a manifestation of that penchant to quash the popular interests of the people, to grab power at the moment when the transition was most desired and most popularly supported. It is definitely something that does not bode well for the future of Sudan, in my view, primarily because, first of all, the forces of freedom who toppled al-Bashir 2 years ago are not going to relent and allow al-Burhan to carry on with the transition he has just proposed, where he has appointed a council. Secondly, al-Burhan has tried to make this interim system that he has just set up, he tried to make it representative of the various parts of Sudan. There is now going to be somebody appointed to represent the Red Sea Hills. There is a man on this new council from Nuba Mountains, one of the areas most destroyed in the war days. There is somebody from Darfur. There is Malik Agar from Nuba, from Blue Nile. So he tried to make this transitional military council representative of all corners of Sudan to give it a hue of diversity and representativeness. But I don't think that is going to convince a lot of people, not within Sudan, not from outside Sudan.
So why is he doing it? I mean, it does, as you suggest, perhaps looks more like a PR exercise, trying to convince people that he's genuinely trying to transition the country. Why is he doing this, and who's he trying to impress?
Well, I think there are two main reasons why he's doing this. First of all, he was simply intending to grab power and stage that coup. And when it became very clear that nobody is going to have it, not Sudanese people, not the international community, he felt trapped, and that he has to either retract or push forward full force out of fear that this coup and all the other things that he and his military colleagues, including Hameti, the deputy now in his council, had been involved in so many atrocities over the years of Sudan's many wars. And so relenting at this minute would have meant them being made to account for these actions by any government, especially if it is a civilian government that comes to power. If Hamdok was to come back after this attempted coup, then this man would have answered for their actions. So now it's either you go full force and save your skin, or you retreat at the risk of having your neck on the guillotines. And he chose the former. I think that is what he's doing. Secondly, the whole world is saying if Sudan goes forward, if al-Burhan and the military leaders go forward with these actions to the point where they will take control of the entire state apparatus and be the ones who define the transition, including the elections that they will plan for, most of the allies of Sudan, the people with goodwill, the Western countries that were supporting the transitional government before the coup, all of them are saying we cannot have this because the coming of the military back to Sudan is too reminiscent of the hateful days of al-Bashir. So Sudan is definitely going to be at a crossroads. It's in dire straits. With al-Burhan in power, all those wonderful promises that were made by the world community to support Sudan will be no more. The Sudanese people on the streets, as the images you are showing can tell, will never relent in having the military have their way in seizing power in the state house. And therefore, it's either Sudan faces a real threat of transitioning back to a civil war, or the military has succeeded in cowing the people by means of a very brutal force. None of these two options is really standing well with the Sudanese people or with anyone who cares about Sudan.
But, you know, General al-Burhan would have seen how popular resistance toppled al-Bashir. Why would he think that he will get any different results from the same people?
He doesn't have to get a different result. He will still go in the end. But he's definitely working for a chance for him to go with as a result of an agreement that he will have made with the forces of freedom and change, such that he doesn't stand trial for his actions. So if there is a way for him to secure some degree of safety for himself, eventually he will go, and he knows he will go, but go in such a way that nothing comes for his neck in the end. He's also being put up to it by countries in wider Middle East and North Africa. So these actions by al-Burhan and Hameti and all the other military leaders, these actions are not just their own actions, they are actions that they are being promised to be rewarded by countries outside Sudan. And I think they have made a wrong choice in prioritizing the promises from outside above the desires and aspirations of the Sudanese people for democracy.
We've had conversations before, and one of the concerns was that al-Bashir might be influencing the country still from jail. Is there any likelihood or any remote chance that Bashir could find some kind of freedom through this process, or is that too much even for al-Burhan?
One would think that it would be too much even for al-Burhan, but it doesn't seem like it in light of the actions that al-Burhan has taken since that fateful night when he declared a coup. One of them was the release of some of the most vicious militant Islamic movement leaders. Another is a release of Ghazi Salahuddin al-Atabani, who was also one of the stalwarts of the Islamic movement in Sudan. And these actions indicate to anyone who has watched Sudan over the years that al-Bashir is still probably pulling strings from behind bars with an eye to eventually, even if al-Bashir himself doesn't come back to power, that at least the power that will be in Khartoum will be a kind of power that will give al-Bashir a much easier ride out of jail for his atrocities of the last 30 years of dictatorial rule in Sudan. So I think al-Bashir is still very much alive and strong and is definitely being considered for a free exit from where he is today.
In Africa, it's often said that any head of state functions and is allowed to serve at the pleasure of the military. Does al-Burhan enjoy the full support of the military? Because once more and more civilians start being killed, it can become difficult to convince soldiers that they're fighting a just war.
No, I think this is really the saving grace for Sudan's freedom and change movement, which is that in the military, the Sudanese military has always sided with the ordinary citizen when things came to shove, as they are showing now. So the continued protests on Sudan's many towns' streets are banking on the possibility that the army will not really support al-Burhan and instead will stand with the protesters. So all it takes is for the protests to continue a little bit longer before they will frustrate the military junta, and the military junta will give in at some point. I think that is really what everybody is betting on, that the middle-level officer corps all the way down to the rank and file will look at the protesters on the streets, and if ordered to quash that protest, most likely they will say, no, these are our boys and our girls, mothers and aunties. We are not going to be willing to shoot at them. And if that becomes the case, with a great number of military officers and soldiers making that stand, the protest will continue and Burhan will go in the end.
So what needs to happen, do you think, for a restoration of some kind of civilian rule?
Well, other than al-Burhan himself having a conscience for his country, other than him saying, me wanting or needing to be the head of a state is not greater than the future viability of the Sudanese state. Other than that, I think what is left now are the Sudanese people themselves, because they don't have Egypt to support them. They don't have Saudi Arabia. They don't have UAE. All those forces are with al-Burhan. And what they are risking, and what al-Burhan is risking, is total disintegration of Sudan going forward. So it is with the Sudanese people now to say, we have to sustain the protests until such time when al-Burhan cannot run this country and will be forced to exit. And then the Sudanese people will sit down and negotiate on what kind of government they want. Mm-hmm. That is the only thing that is going to support, to help Sudan. The international community, the African Union, the IGAD, the Troika of US, UK, and Norway, who have been very active in Sudan's issues, the European Union, the outside world will not force al-Bashir out. Only the Sudanese people, if sustaining these protests, will be the only ones who can force al-Burhan out and then sit down and negotiate Sudan's future going forward.
All right, and perhaps finally, if this situation doesn't get resolved in the short term and we start stretching out, what might this mean for South Sudan and the region in general?
Well, South Sudan is very much embroiled in all of this, particularly in one way, if it is not in many others, and that is South Sudan's live day to day on oil and the oil flow from the oil fields of Upper Nile, Greater Upper Nile, to the Red Sea port in Port Sudan. And if the volatility of the political and security situation in Sudan continues for a long time, there will come a moment when South Sudan will no longer be able to sell its oil and therefore will not generate any money for itself. So there are many consequences for South Sudan that are linked to what is going on in South Sudan. South Sudan was also instrumental in negotiating the peace process that brought together all the peripheries of Sudan, the Blue Nile, the Darfuris, the Nuba, the Red Sea Hills, and the farther north Nubia, to have a peace agreement that stabilized Sudan. If South Sudan can no longer maintain the agreement of all these peripheries to join al-Burhan, the likelihood is that Sudan will go into a civil war. And if it does go into a civil war, the South Sudanese will also have an idea about how can we change our own government, which has failed us over the years for a very, very, very long time.
Professor Jok Madut Jok, always great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for your insights.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to be here.
All right, and that's where we'll leave that conversation. So difficult time for Sudan. The military continue to run the country after the coup that they led recently. And the leader there, General Fattahal-Burhan, has formed a transitional council bringing some civilians, but not the ones that are demonstrating.